I return to a room of nervous, expectant girls. A teacher sticks her head in the door and asks us to be prepared to talk about an influential person in our life. My mother immediately comes to mind, but most of the girls would probably choose their mothers. So if I can talk about someone else, I'll have a little bit more of an impact. In fact, there is another person who's had a strong influence in my life, Mrs. Bernice Hutchison. She's our a cappella choir director. Great, I have my subject. I can do this. When my name's called, I walk out onto a small stage. Seated below me are 3 people, the principal and 2 teachers. One of them is Mrs. Hutchison. What? No, I can't talk about her now. So I stumbled through the initial questions, frantically thinking about who I should talk about. I have no idea what I said. I wanted to say something about her. But there she was, staring at me with the other teachers, waiting for me to do something brilliant with poise, content, and great appearance. So ever since that guarded moment in that small room where she sat looking up at me, I have wanted to pay tribute to this teacher. Mrs. Hutchison dedicated her life to teaching her students an appreciation for great music. She taught vocal skills with the goal of helping us find our highest potential. Her challenges were presented with a demanding discipline, propelled by the highest standards I have ever faced outside of my parents' home. Bernice Hutchison was always impeccably dressed. Her clothes were tailored dresses and suits, classics that looked expensive but were never showy. She wore half glasses over deep-set, piercing dark eyes. Her brown hair was short, with a 40s look about it. The side-parted hair was secured with a bobby pin or 2 over here, and the curls were tight around her head, just below her ears. I used to envision her at bedtime doing this ritual of making these curls. If you're old enough, you'll remember this. You take a piece of hair and you twist it around, and then you somehow make a little circle with it, and then you awkwardly reach for the bobby pins and stick them in, and when you're done, you have a head full of X's. The curls will come out in the morning, and you're ready to go. So it made me smile that she had to do this just like the rest of us. Although those big plastic rollers were just coming into fashion, and I knew that Mrs. Hutchison would never wear a bouffant hairdo. So she was a tall, stout woman, and how she carried herself demanded attention when she walked into a room. A formidable and no-nonsense woman. A few years later, she and her husband came to one of our reunions. I was surprised to meet a laid-back, trim, handsome, quiet man. They were a bit of an odd couple, and yet, watching them, I noticed smiles and an acerbic wit in interactions reflecting love and a playfulness that I never saw in her classroom. Here's another memory of this special teacher from 1961. I hurried up the stairs to the choir rehearsal room, filled with both excitement and trepidation. When the bell rang, Mrs. Hutchison would be seated at the piano. You were to be in your seat, ready to sing. She inspired us to want to make beautiful music with her. We tried, but we weren't confident in our growing vocal skills yet. So at this point, her praise and compliments were few and far between. As the rehearsal progressed, if she heard mistakes, she would stop playing abruptly. The room would fall silent, and she looked sternly around the room at each part. Sopranos, stand. Oh my God. With knees shaking, we would stand, and Mrs. Hutchison would play the line again, and we would sing. Rio, Rio, she who guard our home with safety, God has let the black goat from the lamb, Our Lady. If it was right, she would say, joining us. Thank you. And if she does not happy with what she heard in your section, then one by one, you got to sing the line. So the offending voice was found in the notes remedy. Rehearsal could be and often was embarrassing, but the results musically were worth it. Excuse me just a second. She offered a diverse repertoire that included classical pieces, international folk songs, and musical theater. She directed us in a wonderful production of Kiss Me Kate and Bernstein's beautiful but difficult Candide. Our Candide was among the first performed by high school students in the country. In the spring of that year, we were chosen to sing in a state music competition in Monterey, California. We were hosted by Asilomar, and the conference center's large dining hall was turned into a performance space with risers at one end. On the final day, each choir sang one number. Our entry was a Bach chorale, the Lamb that was crucified. Mrs. Hutchison had taught us to respect the text as representative of the time that Bach lived in, when the church was his patron. He wrote religious music because it put food on the table. We were the last choir to perform. Our nerves were on high alert as we filed onto the risers, looked out at the assembled judges, the other competitors, and our chaperoning parents. With the deadpan demeanor of a drill sergeant, Mrs. Hutchison strode to the center of the choir and raised her arms to begin. Her face was a study in concentration that commanded our attention. Then the music soared into the room, filling the space with our voices. When we finished, there was absolute silence in the room. Our eyes were still locked on Mrs. Hutchison. Then a small smile began to form on her face, and she leaned forward and said, oh so softly, "Bless you." She dropped her arms, and the room erupted with applause. In that brief moment of intimacy that we shared with her, her praise was etched in our hearts. Perhaps we had even exceeded her expectations. And yes, we took home the top prize. School politics ended Mrs. Hutchison's career at LA High. When her mentor in the school system retired, the voices protesting the religious music her choirs were singing prevailed, and she was transferred to another high school for her last years of teaching. They just didn't understand. Her LA High students were Christians and Jews and other religions. Ethnically, we were blacks and Asians and Caucasians. The music was historically correct and perfect for our introduction to great music. We understood why we were singing those pieces. I have gone on to sing and enjoy choral performance since those a cappella choir days. I know that I have Bernice Hutchison to thank for the place high standards in music have in my life. Many of us can look to a teacher who has greatly influenced the course of our lives. She was mine, and I am forever grateful.